Welcome to the third episode of the Punch Plan podcast. In this video, we're going to be going over Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley 2, giving our analysis and predictions. So let's get straight into the analysis. So I mean, this is going to be a really interesting fight, and it's gonna be hard to predict how this is going to go because obviously Jake Paul won by decision in the last fight by unanimous or split decision actually. So that was a good fight. It just seemed like Woodley didn't do enough to get the win in that fight, and he didn't throw enough, he didn't do enough, he wasn't working enough, but Jake Paul stayed active and he just got the decision win.
Yeah, Woodley had a couple of different moments of success. Of course, when he managed to rock Jake pretty badly, and then pretty much almost a knockdown, and then also he got a couple of good shots at different times of the fight. But his activity is really what costed him, and due to him just not throwing as much as people expected, and just in general, it cost him a lot of rounds on the board, which Jake managed to capitalize on and threw a couple nice combos and managed to rack up the points.
Yeah, and obviously this rematch is going to be interesting because we're going to see like how these two have matched up. Obviously Jake Paul's had a full training camp going into the Tommy Fury fight, which Tommy Fury pulled out in the last 2 weeks. So it's going to be interesting to see if Jake Paul might have that edge. He looks a lot slimmer, which I've noticed. So that could play a factor into how this one will go. Um,
Yeah, I was just seeing in some of his posts, he looks a lot
Yeah,
smaller than
bro, he
he
looks
used to.
tiny. He
It
looks
was such
tiny.
a
Like he looks like
it
he
looks
can make
so
180.
weird.
Like I don't understand. Like what? I wonder what he's gonna weigh in this fight. But
Be doing it for some of his cardio because last Woodley
yeah,
fight he kind of gassed
and I
himself out,
noticed.
so he might be trying to get his cardio more in shape
Yeah,
by maybe losing some of the weight.
and I noticed he's been talking a lot about how he has upped his strength and conditioning. Got a good nutritionist in his camp and has really been focusing on that. So it's gonna be interesting if to see if he has better cardio. Obviously, he gassed out in the last fight. Around rounds like 4 to 8. He didn't seem like he really had that energy, but he was still winning rounds at that point. At least fifth, sixth, seventh probably we would give to him. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I think for Woodley, I think his main key to success in this fight is it's just gonna be to be more active, because he was super hesitant to throw, even though he was walking down Jake. He was never really letting go of his hands and putting it on Jake. So yeah, that would definitely be something he would need to work on. And going into this second fight, it's kind of interesting to me how he's been saying, recently. You would think because he's been posting on his Instagram and all these social medias that he wants the rematch and he wants another shot at Jake. But to me, it kind of seems like he didn't think he was gonna get this because he said that he didn't watch that first fight until like a few days ago, and then like the reporter asked like why'd you wait until only a few days ago to watch the fight? And he was like, well, this fight wasn't announced, so we weren't fully looking into it. And to me that kind of shows that Woodley wasn't really preparing for this Jake Paul fight as much as some people think. But I think he might have been preparing for a fight, just not sure if it was for Jake.
Yeah, Woodley was campaigning for this rematch ever since the fight ended, pretty much, and he's been talking about how he thinks he won it, and also how he thinks they should run it back, and then all that drama as well with the tattoo, the "I love Jake Paul" tattoo, and then
Yeah.
yeah, it's just interesting to see how now Woodley just hasn't watched that fight, even though he's been wanting this rematch for all these months since since their fight. So it's just I don't know how that really makes sense. And since he already has such a short training camp because he's on late
Yeah,
notice
only like
since
1 week.
Since Tommy pulled out, uh, him not having watched this fight and then already kind of having some adjustments in mind for this rematch might cost him a bit since now just less preparation for him
Yeah.
as well as less time for him to get fit
Yeah,
and
and
into fight mode.
Yeah, and another thing in that press conference that caught my eye was kind of Woodley was talking about the first fight, like after round four, that Jake never took control of the fight. He never got like obviously that knockdown happened, or people call it a knockdown because the ropes held Jake Paul up, and technically under boxing rules that's a knockdown. So I'm gonna be calling that a knockdown. So when Woodley scored that knockdown, he was saying that Jake never really got the momentum back, and he never won a round after that from after rounds 4 to 8. So that's 5 rounds to Woodley. But like if you're really watching that fight, you could just see Jake does get his momentum back, and the only reason that happened was because Woodley kind of let him, you know?
Woodley like has really no one to blame but himself really, because he after that huge moment for him knocking down Jake, and then he himself couldn't even be active enough to try to capitalize on that huge moment for him, and then he just lays back and just kind of takes rounds off, even though he wasn't even tired, since well, a combination of him not throwing much, as well as he was on the front foot the whole time, not moving too much, kind of just. And Jake was on the back foot the whole time, having
Yeah.
he was circling the ring the whole time. So Woodley was still pretty fresh,
Yeah,
but
and he was
he
doing
just
good.
froze up.
He was doing good cutting off the ring, but that would be useful if you were actually gonna throw your hands, if you were actually
Yeah,
gonna, put pressure on him. Yeah, he was hunting him down, but he wasn't actually pressuring him. He wasn't actually making Jake Paul, have to do a lot because, he could just stay on the back foot and just cruise through the rounds. So, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see if Woodley comes with a new game plan. Hopefully he'll, try to be more active, try to, use those mistakes to his advantage. But there's a reason he wasn't throwing. Obviously in his MMA career, he was known for, his striking, his boxing. Like he wasn't someone who would throw. In an MMA, that okay, that works because, there's tons of different things. He's primarily a wrestler, so that's going to be what his bread and butter is. But, there's also striking, there's also, there's kicking, there's elbows, there's all these things in MMA. So, if you're not throwing your hands so much in MMA, you can get away with that. But when you're in a boxing match, you're in a boxing ring, all you got is your hands. It's a different story there. So, yeah,
yeah, and that's why like that's number one key for Woodley in this fight, to make that adjustment to throw more. Because also in all his MMA bouts, the fear of like the takedown from Woodley is also kind of what put his opponents on that balance between trying to get ready for his takedown incoming, and then also for a punch. So that also led Woodley to open up a lot more for a lot more strikes, and managed to hurt guys a lot, got a lot of fantastic KOs. But in boxing now, there's none of that. There's no threat of the takedown, so he can't just rely on his power completely now, as he's going to have to throw in order to try to win these rounds. He can't rely on anything external other than that, and if you won't, then the same might happen again, and we might see again Woodley potentially hurting Jake Paul, but
not being able to
he
capitalize.
might not capitalize,
Yeah,
which
yeah, for sure. And
it would suck just seeing him replay on the same mistakes as before.
yeah, for sure. And that was a big factor in how Woodley was able to hurt a lot of his opponents in MMA. He's primarily a wrestler, so obviously the threat of the takedown is gonna be there, and you're gonna be like, okay, is this guy gonna come in? Is he gonna come for my legs? Is he gonna, what's he gonna do? So then he comes in with a huge overhand right and puts down guys like Robbie Lawler and, those kind of things. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, I think now we're going to try to get into more of like, the attributes of both guys. Obviously, Jake Paul, the taller guy by, a good amount of inches, but kind of similar in size, especially with Jake shrinking down to, uh,
Yeah, body
yeah,
wise, they're
at least.
kind of similar now.
Yeah, and Woodley's always been like a big welterweight. He fought at 170 pounds in the UFC, but he wasn't 170 pounds walking around weight for sure. He was definitely well over 200 pounds, probably like 205 pounds he would walk around at during his MMA career and probably now as well. So, Woodley's one of these guys who stays in the gym and stays ready. They're not he's not there just to get in a fight in short notice and suddenly he's, overweight and he's not training in between fights like he is. He's always
Yeah,
ready.
he's not like kind of how Ben Askren was, how he kind of was just came out of retirement pretty much and just all right, let's go, let's accept this fight, and then trying to get this big payday. But now that Woodley's, like you said, he's always in shape, he's always coming ready, and we've seen a bunch of different pictures and posts from Woodley from before Tommy pulled out, even just showing that he's been training for maybe it was a potential different fight that he had, and he was planning some other fights, but now we know that he at least is somewhat in shape for this Jake Paul fight. Obviously, not gonna be 100% like Jake is, because Jake had a completely full training camp for Tommy Fury, but Woodley still has some preparation and still has this, even though it's a short amount of time until this from this when this fight was announced. He still has a bit of time to prepare, and if he really spends the time well, kind of adjusting his mistakes and actually learning from them, and not just repeating his same mistake of not throwing as he did, even though he's been getting this criticism of not throwing his hands for so many fights in a row in the UFC as well, and he just kept continuing it. So if he can finally change that up, then he'll find huge
And that's a
success in this
problem
fight.
we saw even like I saw a long time ago. I think when Conor McGregor was getting in the boxing ring with Floyd Mayweather, Tyron Woodley kind of put this tweet out saying, you know, me and a bunch of other guys in MMA would do super well in boxing. And even the comments back then, which was like 5 years ago at this point, were like, well, you'd actually have to throw your hands if you want to do boxing,
Yeah,
like so
everyone
it just
knows.
shows like even back then it was still a huge problem for him. But at the same time, Woodley's been boxing for so long. He's had a boxing coach throughout his MMA career, and that's something that he does boxing. Maybe he's not fully sparring only boxing, like under boxing rules. Probably they're doing stand up striking, but that's still boxing. That's still striking. That's still training in martial arts has boxing incorporated into it, obviously. So it's going to be interesting. So he's been training in martial arts, which includes striking, includes boxing. So yeah, that's why I feel like this fight is so even and like kind of evens it out, and that's why the first fight was so even because Jake Paul is this guy who's super green, but he has a lot of attributes like he's young, he's big, he has these things that he has access to high level training
Yeah,
immediately,
athletic.
athletic. So yeah, there's gonna be that like that thing that equals out when you have a guy who's been doing a martial arts for a lot of years but hasn't only done boxing first against someone who has been doing boxing for a couple of years and has been only doing boxing. So yeah. So and Woodley's like he's like a freak athlete, he's not this guy who's just gonna sit around as you mentioned, Ben Askren was out of shape. He literally just came off of a hip surgery when he fought Jake Paul. So like less than a year before that fight happened, he was having a hip surgery, and he said one of the reasons why he took that fight was to get back in shape. Like literally to get back in
Yeah,
shape. So like
yeah,
at
I
that
saw
point,
videos of him talking about that.
it's already a red flag if you're getting into a fight to get out of shape. Like, come
Yeah,
on.
looking back at it, there's so many more like just looking back noticeable things about that Ben Askren fight that
Yeah,
you could just tell that that would lean in favor of Jake.
for
And
sure.
also one more thing I wanted to touch about on Woodley's issue of not throwing is I think a lot of that stems from him getting accustomed to just his power and him relying on it and being able to knock these guys out, hurt these guys, and now he just kind of thought, "Oh, well, I'm able to do this. Let me just kind of like pick my shots and just catch them at the right time," which he just got used to, and now this is just led him to being super inconsistent. And even when he ends up hurting these guys, he still is just wired into not throwing at all, which is super is really gonna play to his downfall as well in all fights, not even just for this Jake Paul
Yeah,
fight,
but I
if
feel
he even
like I feel like
continues.
the style that he has in striking, it could work in MMA because when you're boxing, there's gonna be like a lot of times like as you saw Jake Paul do, he was throwing combinations in the pocket and then get out. You're not gonna see that from Woodley. You're not gonna see him come into the pocket and then throw a couple of punches. Like he's the type of guy who picks his shots. He picks his shots and he throws one at a time. Because in MMA, you throw a bunch of punches and then suddenly, you're on the floor. You're getting countered. You got taken down or you got whatever could have happened. That's not something that's common in MMA where you're seeing 1,000 strikes thrown at once. In boxing, obviously, it's only strikes, so it's only punches. So you're gonna see a lot more combinations in boxing compared to MMA. But if Woodley can fix that for this next fight, that's definitely gonna be something that's possible. But I don't think he's gonna be able to fix that because obviously he's only had a week to train for this fight specifically. So yeah, that's not something that I see Woodley improving on in terms of him throwing combinations or him throwing more. Um, but yeah, it's still going to be an interesting fight. I feel like if Woodley can land just a nice shot on Jake, I feel like he might have learned from his mistakes to the point where he's gonna throw more. He's gonna try to be more on him and more yeah, just like on his ass and just fuck him up.
Yeah, he's gotta have seen all these memes just clowning him over
Yeah.
getting Jake hurt and just not doing
I mean
anything
he and,
about
he,
it.
and he's
This guy was waving his hands in the air,
yeah.
just taunting,
Yeah,
not even
like literally
throwing.
just like winding up for like six
It's so
hours.
dumb.
But
Yeah,
what
if
can you
he
do?
capitalized, like who knows? We could have been talking about how Jake Paul is retired from boxing. Who
Yeah,
knows? But I guess we'll have to see if Woodley changes that, which he's gonna have to, or
yeah.
same might happen.
It
And
kind of spiraling into now like how the key points of how Tyron Woodley will beat Jake Paul in the boxing rematch, like in the boxing rematch. So kind of what he has to do, the key assets that he really needs to do, as we've been saying, he needs to throw. Like he really needs to just have more output, have more volume, and just be confident in himself. This guy obviously in the last fight he was kind of hesitant because Jake Paul's this young guy who's fast, and you've seen him knock down people like Ben Askren. Obviously, Nate Robinson got brutally knocked out. So even though Nate Robinson isn't a highly trained boxer, but he still has the ability to knock someone out. So that's proven. So Woodley's he's going to be more hesitant, and also he generally just doesn't throw a lot. So I feel like
yeah, like
sorry.
yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I feel like Woodley, he did a lot of good things in that first fight. He was on the front foot, he was pushing it, he was not gassing himself too out with so many sudden movements, and he was kind of pushing the pressure. Except, of course, how he wasn't applying to that pressure by threatening Jake. And he also came in right with how he was trying to be cautious, but also he was a bit too cautious of course, just not throwing. But he did a lot of good things right. He had some good defense lined up, and he was just being careful of Jake throwing his shots. He
Yeah,
got caught with a few combos, a few nice combos from Jake, but
especially early on.
otherwise he was doing good, and he was eating a lot of Jake's best shots. I think maybe he might have gotten stunned a bit at one point where he clinched up, but otherwise he was eating the shots, and he was doing really well. And but the activity just killed him in that first fight. It just destroyed. He didn't have any momentum to, or he had only like that big momentum when he knocked down Jake pretty much, but then he just killed it by just not following up. But even though he was still on the front foot, though, he was still pressuring Jake by moving forward, and Jake was, you could see he was fully on the back up. He was hurt, he was wobbled, but just nothing followed up, which just,
Yeah,
and
and
then
credit to
Jake
Jake
just
because I mean,
recovered.
he was durable. He wasn't going down. He was staying on his feet, and he was moving. He was getting caught by big time shots, but he was staying alive, and he was coming back with shots of his own. So you got to give him credit there. I feel like another thing for Woodley that he's got to impose on Jake is kind of just not let these rounds fly by. You saw in the first fight, the first 3 rounds were literally like nothing from Woodley. It was like, he was just feeling him out and literally doing nothing while Jake was on the back foot just winning rounds while he was fresh. Obviously, you know, it's going to be harder for him to win those first couple of rounds because, Jake's fresh, he's not tired, he's still moving, he's still, but I think if Woodley's able to capitalize at least on, a couple of early rounds and maybe, show Jake, he's in the fight from the beginning, then I feel like that could really go to his advantage because obviously those a lot of rounds just pass him by. Even the fifth, sixth, and seventh round, when Woodley was saying in this press conference that he had recently, he was saying like, "Oh, I don't think Jake ever got the momentum back after that fourth round knockdown." But Jake did get that momentum back because Woodley didn't throw enough. He didn't impose himself enough. He just let the rounds go by while Jake just stayed on the back foot, jabbed his way into winning on the judges' scorecard. So I feel
Yeah,
like
Jake just robbed those rounds pretty much. Even the beginning rounds, even though Jake was kind of fresh,
yeah,
it's not like he threw a lot. Like he threw like a few good combinations, but it's not like he was doing like a lot of. It's not like he was super active because, of course, he was also being super cautious of Woodley's power, and I think that's also why he decided to go on the back foot, like heavily in this fight, is because he was, of course, he knows the power that Woodley possesses, and he ended up feeling it, of course, later in the
huge
fight. But
shots.
like, it's not like Jake did a crazy. He gassed himself out in the first rounds, and he just went all out to get those rounds. Woodley just pretty much let him have it
Yeah,
by just
exactly.
unloading.
And another thing that Woodley has to do is just kind of impose his durability. Jake was seen to, not have the greatest cardio or at least cardio management. The way that Jake was, running around the ring every 5 seconds and, throwing him on the other side of the ring and just running around the ring. And that's going to take a lot of energy from you, especially if you're a novice. You've only been doing it a couple of years. That's going to gas you out. And that's exactly what we saw. Jake was breathing heavily in like the fifth rounds. And yeah, we got to see Woodley impose his durability because we saw that fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth round, he was still able to do so much more. He still had so much left. He wasn't even breathing heavily. He was out there. He was barely even sweating. So if Woodley's able to impose his durability, stay durable, stay strong in there, and impose his cardio, which it might be difficult this fight because he hasn't had a whole camp like Jake has, and Jake's been preparing for Tommy Fury, who's supposedly a real boxer, people say, but obviously that's not happening now. So it's going to be interesting. He also has to capitalize on the fact that Jake's not fighting Tommy Fury anymore. Jake has to make those adjustments on the fly. So yeah.
Yeah, and something I found very interesting, even though the little times Woodley threw punches, he would frequently throw that right overhand just in one punch, like just that one punch alone, every so often. And but even that had like some effect. Maybe it wouldn't like hit Jake all the time, but it would always make Jake more cautious. So like you could just see the advantages Woodley would have if he just even anything, just threw any sort of punches even just to get Jake mixed up in it, and then it would lead to Woodley finding a possibility of maybe being able to crack Jake more frequently. Like if Woodley was like also doing a good job at like parrying some of the early strikes in the first couple of rounds, like parrying some of Jake's jabs and his punches. But I feel like he was just kind of too caught up in what Jake was doing and not what he himself had to actually do to win this fight.
I agree with that. Yeah,
And
fully.
Jake just kind of Jake did right. He was sticking to the game plan. He managed to recover super well, and he of course has to make some adjustments, which we'll be talking about. But for him, considering some like of course he could have probably been more active in himself, even though he was trying to be super cautious of Woodley's power, but he was just taking advantage of Woodley not throwing anything and just lining up some good
Yeah.
shots and getting the points on the board for himself.
And even another thing that Woodley, could do to beat Jake Paul. Obviously, we're going through tons of different things that Woodley has to do. If he wants to capitalize on this rematch, if he wants to win this, another thing is he's got to counter. He's got to make Jake Paul pay because he did. I don't think he landed a significant counter shot in that first fight. And Jake Paul's coming in and out, and coming into range, coming out of range, throwing combos, doing this, doing that. He's moving everywhere, but Woodley's just kind of letting him do it. He's just sitting around hunting him down, just not making him pay. Maybe he's blocking, maybe he's getting out of the way, maybe he's doing that, but is he countering? Is he hitting him with nice shots on the return and finishing the exchanges right? I don't think so. He's not. He hasn't shown to do that. He hasn't shown to be able to counter Jake or just impose himself more in that aspect. So it's gonna be hard for him. It's gonna be hard for him to win this fight if he's not making Jake pay for the mistakes he's doing. Obviously, Jake's super raw in his skills, and he's only been doing it for a couple years. Willie's so much more experience. That's all that experience and you know all that all that pedigree of being a Hall of Famer, of being a five-time UFC world champion. That's no easy task. So if he just imposes himself in all these aspects, then he definitely has the ability to beat Jake Paul. I don't see why Woodley could go into this fight and not beat Jake Paul because he has all the aspects to do it.
Yeah, and what do you think some of the things that Jake Paul can do to win this rematch with to win again the rematch with Tyron Woodley?
I think so for Jake Paul, it's gonna be it's a lot harder to say because obviously he had a lot of success in that first fight and that did well for him. But I feel like he definitely has to come in with a different game plan, a different strategy. He kind of was just on the back foot that whole time. I feel like he should maybe not come forward to Woodley, but just be more confident in his ability. It seemed like he wasn't fully confident in his ability to knock out Woodley or confident in his ability to walk down Woodley. So Woodley has so much experience that it's going to be hard for Jake Paul to impose himself on Woodley, but I think he has to do more. He has to kind of be more confident in himself, kind of different things, and also he's the bigger guy. He's the naturally taller guy by a good amount. So he should use that to his advantage. He has a longer reach, and his stance is more open. He has more of an elusive stance than Woodley. Woodley's kind of just stationary and staying there and not really moving as much. So I feel like yeah, just keep up to what he's doing. Obviously Jake looks a lot slimmer in this fight as we mentioned. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, like we were talking about how Woodley needs to impose his will. Also, Jake, like you said, being the bigger man in general, should also be trying to aim to do that and kind of kind of put himself in positions where he's not always being backed up all the time and forcing himself to circle around the ring all the time. And then, which is another thing that Jake has to fix in this rematch, is kind of, yeah, is cardio or also cardio management, whichever the one it was that costed him to gas out in the last fight. And then if he were to be fresh going into all these rounds, then I feel like he also have a lot of a better opportunity to possibly even finish Woodley. Of course, it's hard to say since we didn't really see Woodley hurt at any moment of that fight, really. So it would be hard to say, but he would definitely put himself in better position if he were to just have that extra energy and just to
Yeah.
keep going and try to land big shots on Woodley.
I mean, I think the key for Jake Paul to to really finish Woodley, to really actually stop him, I feel like the key is he has to take risks. You know, Jake Paul wasn't really taking risks in that first fight. He wasn't really, taking risks or, making himself a tricky fighter. He was more of like a textbook boxer that you know what to expect from him. So for him to finish Woodley, he has to take more risks, and that's 100%. Because if he's just gonna sit there and box with Woodley, he might come out with a decision, but he could also there's a chance of him getting caught and him just like the first fight getting hit by the big time shot, and this time he might not survive. So it's gonna be hard. So if he wants to finish Woodley, he has to take risks. Maybe come through walk through the fire a little bit, walk Woodley down a little bit. We've seen in Woodley's MMA career, he's not particularly the best fighter on the back foot. He's not particularly such this amazing fighter who's on the back foot. So it's gonna be interesting to see if Jake could hunt down Woodley in this rematch, or maybe not even hunt down Woodley, because I don't see him doing that because it's unrealistic, considering especially what happened in that first fight. So maybe just impose himself on Woodley, just and like you said, the cardio management is a huge deal. How he was moving around the ring so much, and that's really going to drain you, and that's exactly what we saw. So
And also a huge thing that Jake Paul usually does in all of his fights, which in this one he didn't really do at all. Maybe because of the fear of the power or whatever it may be, but it's countering. And like how he got that a lot of the Nate Robinson knockdowns or KO, he was just countering him. And like here he didn't really do it. And I feel like I was talking about before, how Woodley was throwing out that big right overhand many times just to kind of put it there against Jake. If he manages to analyze that during the fight and kind of manages to figure a way to counter it consistently, he can catch Woodley big and maybe hit him flush with a big shot that'll end up switching the tides for him, and who knows what could happen from there. And I feel like that would be heavily to his advantage since his style is a lot usually around countering his opponents, and to see him not really doing that as much in his last fights and more going combo heavy, which was still good and it was working.
yeah,
I feel like it would be effective if he's able to time it
and
well and
yeah,
actually
and,
get the
and,
rhythm
and I
of
feel like
it. If
that's
he can't though,
I feel like
it might end up
I feel
bad.
like that's how Jake might be able to actually finish Woodley. If he's able to time him, maybe, just have just that one shot that's just a flush timed shot. Well, maybe Woodley's gonna come out more careless in this fight. Maybe he saw those comments that, oh, come on, he was so passive. He was so negative. He wasn't throwing. So, if Woodley sees those comments, and he decides, fuck it, I'm just gonna go in there and I'm just gonna just go blazing in there. So and try to hurt Jake, then Jake should be ready to counter him, and ready to time him, because that's how you're gonna hurt Woodley. That's how you're gonna drop him. That's exactly what we saw in the Vicente Luque fight, with Tyron Woodley. We saw him come in, you know, balls to the wall, just guns blazing. So you know it's gonna be interesting, to see if Jake's able to time him like that. But that kind of also relies on Woodley coming in more careless, more determined, more
Yeah.
you know.
And like you're talking about that Vicente Luque fight, it's interesting because he managed to hurt Luque there by going like careless and just kind of just putting
Yeah.
his all into it right away. But he also ended up after getting hurt himself
Well,
and
well,
then
I
at
I
the end
think I
finished.
think I think more of that fight was after he hurt Luque. He started to come
Yeah,
in.
he got more
Yeah, he got
careless.
he got even
So
more
it,
careless. So I feel like
yeah,
I feel like that's kind of why Woodley was more cautious in the Jake Paul fight, because this guy's a YouTuber. You don't just want to get countered by a YouTuber and just be on the floor. But if Woodley's now overconfident, he's thinking, okay, well, Jake Paul really didn't pose any threat to me. He didn't hurt me at all in that first fight. 25 minutes in the ring with him, and I didn't feel, a threat in terms of power. So, I could just go guns blazing and have no issues. If Woodley's thinking that, which I mean, first of all, we can't really take those bets like that. But if
Yeah.
that does happen, then that's definitely going to favor Jake in terms of he's going to be able to, you know, try to pick his shots and pick his counters. So yeah, that's going to be interesting because we've seen Jake time his opponents. He's timed Nate Robinson. He timed Ben Askren. He didn't seem to time Woodley much. There's a few shots where he landed and Woodley might have, you know, stumbled or buckled his legs, but there was nothing major that actually got taken place like against Jake Paul did when he was on the ropes and he was knocked down. So yeah, I feel like it's gonna be a tough fight for Jake Paul to finish Woodley, but if he can get it done, that will definitely be a huge statement, and yeah, that'd be super impressive, honestly.
Yeah, and also another reason why Woodley might have came out a bit more like just not throwing compared to his Vicente Luque fight where he's throwing, since it was like a double edged sword for him. He hurt Luque, and then after he got hurt and then finished. So in this fight he was probably thinking, all right, you know what? Like you said, he's a YouTuber, and then I kind of want to be a bit more cautious, just make sure I don't get hurt, and then just more careful. But then it even then it might have just stuck to him so much that even when he hurt Jake, he just still went to freeze mode where he's like, all
Yeah.
right, still got to be cautious, still
Yeah,
got
I
to
mean, I
be
mean, credit
worrisome.
to Jake for really taking this Woodley fight because this is a dangerous match. Woodley is a five-time UFC world champion, and he's always game. He's never not going to be prepared. He's going to come in there and he's going to have a game plan. He's going to have a strategy, and he's going to try, his best to win the fight. So, and especially with the motivator that Jake Paul put $500,000 bounty on himself. He put $500,000 if Woodley's able to KO him or TKO him. Woodley gets 500 grand, and as well, if Woodley does KO him or TKO him, there's going to be a trilogy, so even more money. And that trilogy will guarantee you even more money than you get for the second fight for sure. You know what I mean? So, money
Hmm.
has been, we've seen it already that money has been such a huge motivator for Tyron Woodley, and him being able to finish Jake and potentially securing a trilogy with him would definitely be a huge motivator for Woodley. So it's gonna be dangerous to see if he's gonna come blazing, and if Jake Paul is gonna have what it takes to answer the call and kind of prove him to the world that he is a fighter, and he's gonna be there, and he's tough. I mean, yeah, it's gonna be an interesting fight. But on that
Yeah.
note of what we're kind of saying, we're analyzing everything, and we're thinking, there might be a finish. The last fight went to a split decision, went all 8 rounds, went 24 minutes, so it's definitely possible that there will be a finish in this fight. And I kind of just want to give our final predictions. Both go over who we think is going to win the fight and how they're going to get the job done, how the fight may go. So first take, what are your thoughts on this fight? Who do you think is going to win?
So it's kind of like in a way leading up like the last fight where it's kind of super close and in a way kind of 50-50. A main thing, both guys kind of have a advantage in this coming in. Like Jake has a full training camp, so he's gonna be really well prepared. And of course, Tyron doesn't, but also Woodley coming in knowing that he hurt Jake
And
Paul
also
last time
also no,
and he
having
has
that
the
experience of
confidence.
being in that 24-minute um, battle with him because we've never seen Jake Paul go more than 5 minutes. So Woodley being able to know what it's like to be in the ring with Jake Paul and know what he has to bring to the table is definitely gonna be interesting to see how that affects things.
My prediction is I think Jake Paul's gonna edge it in another decision, and I think Jake Paul's gonna win a unanimous decision this time. But like last time, Tyron's gonna have his moments. I think this time there'll be a well. Last time it wasn't like a definite knockdown, but this time I see it being there's definitely gonna be someone knocked down, and it could be Jake who gets the knockdown this time, maybe with a counter or something like we were talking about, or Tyron knowing that he could hurt Jake badly, he might be able to catch him again, and who knows, maybe even knock him out, or maybe just a knockdown. But I think Jake's gonna make the right adjustments and the right changes in his preparation for Woodley, and he's gonna have that experience of being in there for 24 minutes, and kind of know what to expect from Woodley, and he's gonna make the right changes, and I think he's gonna be able to get the job done. But I don't see him finishing Woodley just because of maybe it was just him being changing, kind of being on the back foot, him not being able to hurt Woodley. But that's why I don't see Jake finishing Woodley, and that's why I think it'll be a unanimous decision win.
That's a good prediction. Of course, that's that's what happened last time in the terms of he got the decision done, and it's a safe bet, it's a solid bet, and it's probably the most likely outcome on in terms of odds and what's likely to happen because we don't know much. We don't know how this rematch is gonna go. It's as you said, it's like a 50-50 fight. We don't really know what's gonna happen in this, but I'm gonna have to go with Tyron Woodley. So. Yeah, this is like the first time where I'm really like convinced that Jake Paul is gonna lose out of all these like his last three fights because again first time going into Woodley I thought Woodley wasn't gonna be able to wasn't gonna be able to withstand Jake Paul's youth and his size and all these attributes that Jake Paul has over him, but he Woodley definitely proved us wrong, and Jake Paul taking stepping up to this fight is definitely courageous on his part. So I definitely see that, and he has to definitely be confident in his skills to take this fight. But at the same time, Woodley taking this on 12 days notice, he's gonna be confident, and with that $500,000 bonus, I think Woodley's gonna be more motivated than ever, and I just think that he's gonna be able to deal with Jake Paul. I feel like now he knows what to expect, and it's gonna be harder for Jake Paul to get the job done, in my opinion, especially because from at least from what we've seen in that last fight, Woodley kind of holds, all the cards. He has the power to drop Jake, as we saw, or maybe we didn't see him fully drop Jake in the last fight, but definitely hurt him and definitely stumbled him, and probably by boxing rules technically knocked him down while he was fumbling on the ropes. So um, yeah, I just think Woodley gets the job done because he's so durable, he's so experienced, his cardio is amazing, and if he can really just impose himself like he should have in that first fight, I think in that first fight, that was Woodley's fight to win, man. Because, well, Woodley didn't really do enough, and he didn't throw his hands, and he didn't do a lot of things. It was kind of like, you felt like Woodley should have won that fight because he had all this attributes, he had the power, he had everything it took, but he just didn't throw his hands, and everyone who watched that fight it pretty much knows it. So, it's definitely hard to call this one. And us having different predictions is definitely interesting. So it's gonna be tough to predict what's gonna happen. But I think Tyron Woodley will get the job done. Probably I see him probably just landing another huge shot on Jake Paul and maybe dropping him or at least hurting him and hopefully will actually impose himself on him this time. He'll use his experience. He'll use his experience to his advantage, and he'll try to get Jake Paul out of there.
So do you think it's gonna be by KO or decision?
I think it's definitely gonna be by stoppage. I mean, if Woodley wins, it will probably be by stoppage. I don't see how he would be able to outpoint Jake Paul, especially considering his style
Mm-hmm.
of MMA. Of how he just picks his shots and doesn't really throw in bunches. So I think if it goes to decision, I think it favors Jake. If it ends in stoppage, I think it favors Woodley, and I think it's gonna be a stoppage. I think it might be the end of Jake Paul's streak here. I don't know if it'll be the end of his career necessarily. They'll probably have a trilogy, to be honest. But I mean, if well, that's if Woodley wins. But I mean, I could be totally dead wrong. I mean, Jake Paul's had a whole training camp to prepare for Tommy Fury. But again, that's a completely different fighter than Woodley. Woodley's an MMA fighter. Jake Paul was probably in there sparring with real boxers, but he should have been sparring with MMA fighters because Woodley's not a traditional boxer. He's not a guy who's going to be throwing combinations and slipping and ducking and moving, and Woodley has a completely different style. But again, Jake Paul and Woodley know what to expect from this fight. I just think it's super tough to call, but I'm gonna have to go with Woodley.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd say that's definitely still like a good prediction, and yeah, it's definitely hard to call. I think for me, the main reason why I'm kind of leaning towards Jake is just because throughout all these fights, Woodley, well, everyone's been criticizing Woodley for the same exact thing. And it's just to throw more. And if he hasn't changed that up from all these fights and of his entire career, I just don't see him really changing that now, especially so late into his career where, it's kind of
I
just,
I I,
you
I
know,
definitely
he wants, oh, yeah, so go on.
I definitely get that, but there's also that part of me like that just thinks, even guys like Floyd Mayweather are telling Woodley like, you know, you did well, but I think you should have thrown more. You should have been more active. And I feel like there's got to be that point where he takes it all in and he just actually goes rogue. I mean, we saw that in the Vicente Luque fight, but it didn't end up too well for him. But I don't know. I feel like I feel like if there's a balance between the Vicente Luque fight and his other fights, if there's a balance, if we can get it in between, because one day he's so patient and he doesn't throw at all, and then the next day he's
And then
going
he just turns
100%.
up and
So I feel like
throws.
if we get a in between of that, which I mean I feel like it's possible because I mean this is his last chance really, Woodley, and
Yeah,
this is his last
definitely.
chance in terms of probably doing anything extraordinary in combat sports in general. And that's not a knock on him, but he's had an amazing career and he's done a
Yeah,
lot.
and he's
And
definitely
if and
older
if and
now,
if he
so
loses to Jake Paul twice, I don't think he's I don't think he's gonna have anything significant left to show the world.
I that's why I just think if Woodley imposes his will, I think he'll be able to win. But just I kind of need to like see it to believe it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So that's why I just kind of edge it. I'm just kind of edging it to Jake Paul for now. But
yeah,
in this fight, definitely it's kind of a 50-50. Anything could really happen at any time, especially with Woodley's power. So I guess we'll see if we're gonna see the same, or maybe we'll see if Woodley can pick the dub up this time. But yeah, that was a good podcast
yeah.
and good predictions.
Yeah, super solid
So I guess we'll
predictions,
see.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a great podcast. We went over like all the different things related to this fight, all the different aspects and attributes that each guy has, and I think we really covered everything. So I hope you guys
Yeah.
enjoyed the podcast. Yeah, that's pretty much been it, and we hope you guys enjoyed.